The children were gone before Elena could even put her hands in the dough. One moment their voices were in the kitchen, that bright chatter of small lives making the air warm, and the next there was only the hollow quiet of a door swinging shut against the wind. The silence wasn't still, it throbbed, carrying with it the faint aftertaste of boots on her porch and the scent of the Empire's antiseptic uniforms. She didn't call out. She didn't run after them. Instead, she wiped the flour from her palms, slow and steady, and set the bowl aside. Somewhere down the road, an engine whined, growing smaller. She closed her eyes for 3 slow breaths. There was no warning, not in any official sense. No summons, no inquiry, no officer leaning politely over a datapad to request an interview. The Galactic Empire didn't believe in the courtesy of due process when it came to potential genetic risks. If their scanners decided a child's lineage might be inconvenient for Imperial stability, they didn't knock. They collected. She'd once read that wolves, when hunting the old and the young, moved in silence. The Empire had made it an art. Her neighbors wouldn't look at her when she passed their porches in the weeks before. They'd heard the rumors, heard the whispers that her record wasn't just classified, but sealed in a vault no civilian was allowed to breathe near. She'd laughed it off in the gentle way that makes people more uncomfortable than reassured. After all, what could a middle-aged widow in a flour-dusted apron be to a galaxy-spanning regime? She'd leaned into the image, the woman who fussed over her tomato vines, who asked after people's gout, who carried honey candies for crying children. She knew how to be harmless when it counted. But there, in the fading echo of the engine's whine, harmlessness evaporated. She could feel the weight of old habits pressing against her ribs. Habits she had once promised herself never to use again. The first sound she made was not a sob or a curse. It was the faint click of the cellar lock opening. She descended into the cool dark, bare feet brushing dust from the steps. Each rung of the narrow ladder, downward, was a shedding of the woman she'd been for the last 8 years. The air smelled of preserved apples, oil, and the faint metallic tang of weapon lubricant. Under the workbench, where the stone met the packed earth, was the case. No one in this quadrant would have recognized it. A battered human cargo trunk with faded stickers from colonies long forgotten. She drew it into the dim light and brushed her hand over the lock. The biometric reader hummed, scanning the lines of her palm, then hissed as the seal broke. Inside, beneath folded fatigues that hadn't seen daylight since the treaty, were the things she'd kept for when the world tilted sideways again. A revolver that had survived 2 centuries of human history, medals she'd never wear in public, a blade from an unregistered forge, still wrapped in cloth. And at the center, a cryopod the size of a helmet. Frost clung to the curved glass. It shifted. Just a tremor, but enough to make her lips curl into something too sharp to be called a smile. The little beast inside wasn't entirely little. Broad-shouldered, low-slung, eyes closed but still managing to look furious. The honey badger was humanity's most ill-tempered biological engineering project. Born from old Earth stock, bred for environments that made other predators curl up and die. Her children had once begged to see it, but she'd never allowed it. Not because she feared it would hurt them, but because she feared they'd love it too much. She set the pod on the workbench. "Not yet," she murmured, tapping the glass. "We'll do this right." Upstairs, the kettle screamed. She climbed back to the kitchen, filled the teapot, and set 2 cups on the table. Not for her, never for her, but for the image she intended to send. The Empire's bureaucracy, for all its cruelty, had channels. And she knew exactly which underpaid communications officer was assigned to filter civilian correspondence to the Emperor's outer office. She composed the message in longhand on real paper, letting the ink dry in the humid kitchen air. "Your Excellency, I believe you have something of mine. Kindly return them before I am forced to retrieve them myself. Regards, Captain Elena Markova, Ret." She took a photograph of the letter next to the untouched tea set. The effect was deliberate. Civility in porcelain and steam, the kind that made people wonder if they were being offered hospitality or bait. Then she transmitted it through the local hub, flagged for diplomatic review. By the time the message reached the Imperial relay, the sun had begun its slide toward the trees, painting the horizon in that dull red that never looked warm. Elena sat on the porch, rocking slowly, letting the quiet settle like dust. She didn't expect a reply. Not yet. She'd given them something better, a choice. In her experience, choices frightened people more than threats. The local news picked up the abduction by morning, burying it under stories about grain shortages and minor skirmishes at the border. The anchor's voice stumbled slightly when reading her name, then recovered in a professional monotone. The Empire preferred its citizens to think such removals were routine, necessary, like trimming a garden. They never mentioned the roots. She began preparations without fanfare, sold the unused tools in the shed, stored what she couldn't carry, burned the rest, walked to the market and bought only things that would fit in a single duffel: dried meat, water purifiers, a coil of wire, 3 types of tea. The grocer didn't ask why. Humans had learned in the last century that the fewer questions you asked a neighbor, the longer they stayed your neighbor. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, tracing the outline of her daughter's handwriting in a school notebook, memorizing the way her son's numbers always leaned left. She let the grief move through her, cold and exact, then pressed it into a box in her mind. It wasn't gone. It would never be gone. But it would not be allowed to spill at the wrong time. 3 days later, an Imperial courier drone arrived with a bland acknowledgement. Her case had been reviewed and dismissed as outside the scope of civilian grievance procedure. The message ended with a line so formulaic she could hear the board clerk's voice. "We thank you for your interest in Imperial governance." She poured herself a cup of tea, sipped once, and set it down without swallowing. Then she packed the trunk, the revolver, the medals, the cryopod, each fit as though the space had been designed for nothing else. On top, she placed the duffel, zip tight. The house around her was suddenly foreign. She closed the shutters, locked the doors, and didn't look back. Her transport was a battered courier vessel leased under a dead cousin's name. The pilot, a wiry woman with a missing eye, didn't ask questions when Elena stepped aboard. Just gave a short nod and eased them off the dirt strip, engines humming. They rose through cloud into black sky, the stars unfolding like a patient army. Halfway to the first relay station, Elena opened the pod's feed. The honey badger blinked awake, eyes like molten gold, unblinking. She spoke softly to it, a stream of Russian that sounded almost like a lullaby. The animal tilted its head, then returned to stillness, its breathing a slow, predatory rhythm. At the relay, a customs officer, thin-scaled and smug, came aboard to check manifests. He stopped when he saw her sitting with the pod on the seat beside her. "Live cargo requires." "It's sleeping," she said, as if that settled the matter. Her smile was small, her voice gentle, but the air between them tightened. The officer cleared his throat, tapped his datapad, and left without meeting her eyes. When the ship slipped back into hyperspace, the pilot chuckled. "They don't like you," she said. "They don't know me," Elena replied. She turned her gaze to the streaking stars outside the viewport. Yet, the next transmission she sent was brief, addressed directly to the Imperial Office of Child Welfare Enforcement. "Last request. You have until I arrive." No signature this time. Somewhere ahead, beyond the stars, smeared by speed, was the Emperor's world, center of a dominion that thought it could take what it wanted without consequence. Somewhere in its high towers, her children were being catalogued, tested, and, if the bureaucrats had their way, placed with more suitable guardians. She closed her eyes and pictured them, not as frightened, but as waiting. They would know she was coming. She had taught them patience, and patience was just another form of stealth. When the courier ship's engines eased into their final burn toward Imperial space, she rested her hand lightly on the pod. The honey badger's ears twitched. "Almost there," she whispered. "And we're knocking first, because it's polite." In the dark beyond the viewport, the Emperor's world grew from a glint to a sphere of light, its cities burning white against the shadowed continents. Her jaw loosened into the faint curve of a smile. Not the one she used for neighbors. Not the one for friends. This was the other smile, the one no one ever survived seeing twice. The station's outer ring shuddered with the sound of alarms, not the frantic scream of disaster, but the deliberate chime of an important arrival. The dock's public address voice announced her name in that mechanical cadence the Empire used for things it didn't quite recognize. Elena Markova. No titles. No rank. No history. Just a human woman stepping out of a narrow courier craft with one hand on a weathered duffel, and the other holding a cryopod that seemed far too heavy for her frame. No one at the docking concourse recognized her, but they recognized the look, quiet, assessing, like she was already measuring them for something they didn't want to think about. 2 security officers moved to intercept her, but she gave them the kind of smile that made men hesitate before a duel. "Dinner first," she said, as if the matter had been settled before she even stepped off the ramp. They led her, not entirely sure why, to the upper-tier restaurant reserved for dignitaries and negotiators. It was the sort of place designed to intimidate visitors with its view of imperial space. Vast panes of reinforced crystal looking out over a sweep of starlight and ship traffic. The maitre d', a tall avian creature with a beak that clicked when displeased, tried to explain that guests normally booked weeks in advance. Elena tilted her head, listening as though the words were interesting, then said softly, "You've already prepared a table for me." And somehow they had. She sat where the glass curved around the station spine, a panoramic sweep of light and void behind her. The cryopod was set in the seat beside her like a sleeping child. The maitre d' made no comment, though its feathers rippled uneasily. The Imperial Station commander arrived minutes later, a broad, shell-armored Lithari, whose carapace bore the blue and gold insignia of central authority. Commander Toth carried himself with the confidence of someone used to having the last word. He sat without asking, his compound eyes narrowing at the sight of the pod. "I assume you know why you're here," he said. "Yes," Elena replied. "I came for dinner." He blinked, recalibrating. "We're not here to socialize, human. The Emperor expects." She poured tea into both cups, the scent of spiced leaves unfurling between them. "The Emperor will wait. You'll be more agreeable after dessert." She pushed one cup toward him, then reached for the small basket of bread the server had left. The motion was casual, almost lazy, but it made Toth lean back ever so slightly, as if he'd caught a glimpse of teeth behind the smile. The first course arrived, alien delicacies arranged with surgical precision. Elena ignored them, unpacking her own contribution from the duffel. A jar of dark red soup, a loaf of black bread, and a squat bottle of clear liquid. "Borscht," she said when Toth's antennae twitched. "Earth staple. And vodka, to keep the conversation honest." Toth didn't drink, but the staff brought glasses anyway. She poured him one, lifting her own in a faint toast. "To peace among species," she said. The clink of glass on glass was soft, but in the quiet between them, it sounded like a fuse being lit. She talked while they ate, not about her children, not about the Empire's policy, but about the way frost formed on old glass windows, about a blizzard she once saw that lasted 3 days and buried a tank column, so deep the enemy marched right over them without knowing. She told it with the kind of slow warmth that drew you in before you realized the moral was about patience and killing at close range. Toth tried to steer the conversation toward her purpose here. "You must understand, human. The welfare of Imperial wards is not a matter open to individual negotiation." She sipped her tea, eyes on the stars. "And you must understand, Commander, I've never negotiated for my children. I've only ever taken them back. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it made the air between them go thin." In the adjacent booth, 2 junior officers exchanged glances. One discreetly tapped his wrist console, running her name through the public files. The result was a polite blank. He tried the encrypted military database and found nothing except a red stamp. Black eyes only. His hand trembled slightly as he shut the console. When a main course arrived, some delicacy from the Emperor's gardens, Elena leaned forward and asked Toth about his homeworld. He answered reluctantly, giving clipped details, but she listened with such intense interest that he found himself telling her about the migration of the silverback beetles in spring. "Beautiful," she murmured, "how they swarm without a single wasted movement. Almost military, isn't it?" Dessert came as a collection of fragile crystal dishes filled with sweet creams. She examined them as though they were puzzle pieces. You know, she said, in my world, dessert is the point when the knives come out. Not for fighting, of course, just for cutting cake. But still. Her spoon scraped slowly along the rim of the dish, metal on glass. The honey badger stirred in its pod, a faint rumble audible under the table. Tot's antennae quivered, but Elena kept eating. At one point, a young alien officer approached to ask if she needed anything else. She looked up at him with the calm of a mother assessing a child's homework. Yes, she said. A list of all transport schedules to and from the capital in the last 24 hours. The officer froze. For my scrapbook, she added, smiling faintly. He left without answering, but he would bring it. Everyone brought her what she asked for. The shift came slowly, like clouds drifting over the sun. Tot stopped trying to hurry her. He stopped pretending he was in control. The conversation moved less like an interrogation and more like a confession. He told her the Emperor disliked delays. She told him the Emperor was welcome to send someone else to fetch her, if he could find someone braver. It was almost pleasant, in the way a predator's shadow can feel cool before you realize you're in it. When the plates were cleared, Elena wiped her hands on a linen napkin and looked directly into Tot's eyes. Now, she said, we can talk about the children you took. He started to protest, to recite the legal framework, but she cut him off with a lift of her hand. You've had your meal. You've told your stories. You've measured me. Now you know this isn't going to be solved with forms. The honey badger shifted again, its claws clicking faintly against the glass. Tot's mandibles clicked once in what might have been unease. In the corridor beyond the restaurant, a pair of lithery guards whispered. One of them shook his head. She's smiling, he murmured. The other frowned. So, the first guard's voice dropped. Humans don't smile like that unless someone's about to bleed. Elena stood, gathering the pod and her duffel. Thank you for the company, Commander, she said with perfect politeness. I'll be seeing you again soon. Tot rose slowly, unsure whether he'd been dismissed or spared. The Emperor will get the courtesy of my arrival, she finished for him. After that, we'll see. As she walked toward the docking bay that would take her to the capital, the honey badger's eyes opened, molten and unblinking. She didn't look down at it, but her lips moved in a whisper meant for its ears alone. Almost time. The Emperor's court was already in session when the doors blew open. Not with violence, not with force, just the sudden, absolute swing of metal and marble, as if the hinges themselves understood who had arrived. The sound cut through the layered murmur of dignitaries, silencing diplomats mid-sentence and halting the shuffling of scribes. The guards at the threshold stiffened, weapons angled forward, but she walked past them without breaking stride, her duffel at her shoulder, the cryopod cradled in her arm like it was a child. Banners of alien silk hung high above the chamber, each stitched with the sigil of a conquered world. Their colors clashed in deliberate defiance of harmony, a reminder that here, in the heart of the Galactic Empire, only power mattered. The Emperor himself, an insectoid giant whose carapace glimmered with the sheen of black glass, sat coiled in his throne, mandibles flexing in a slow, disdainful rhythm. Elena Markova, he said, drawing out each syllable as though tasting a foreign spice. Human female. She stopped halfway up the long stone aisle and gave him a small bow, the sort reserved for strangers who might become dangerous. You summoned me. A ripple of chuckles moved through the assembly, soft, dismissive, the sound of predators who believed they'd cornered prey. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. You mistake your position. You came here uninvited, to petition for the return of imperial wards. My children, she said, voice level. The court's humor deepened. One of the silver-robed advisors murmured to another, they breed so sentimentally. Elena's gaze skimmed the room, not lingering anywhere too long, but the sweep was precise. Doorways, guard stations, the small vent above the throne dais that could fit a recon drone. Every glance was as casual as someone admiring architecture. I've come, she said, to ask once more, with courtesy, for their return. After this, the tone changes. That earned a sharp laugh from the emperor. You threaten the empire in its own hall. I warn it, she corrected. Threats come later, with fewer witnesses. Her words hung in the vaulted air, and though they were quiet, they carried a weight the court hadn't prepared for. The emperor's compound eyes flickered, tiny, quick movements, the way an insect watches something it can't quite categorize. He gestured, and a pair of guards dragged forward a holographic display. 2 children appeared in ghostlight, alive, unharmed, standing stiffly in the sterile confines of an Imperial Youth Adaptation Center. They didn't speak, but Elena's hands tightened slightly on the pod. Her eyes softened for just a breath, and then the steel returned. They are safe, the Emperor said, and they will remain so, provided you accept that their future lies with us. She let the silence after that stretch too long. Long enough that the courtiers shifted in their seats. Long enough that someone coughed. No, she said at last. Not loud. Not heated. Just final. The Emperor leaned back, as if savoring the moment before he crushed her. Then you will watch them disappear into the vastness of the Empire. Never to. The alarms cut him off. Sharp, urgent tones that made even the guards glance upward. A junior officer stumbled into the chamber, panting, scales pale. Highness, the prison barge caressed on. It's been breached. The Emperor's mandibles clicked in irritation. Handle it. The officer hesitated. It appears to have collided with a human supply freighter. We've lost the entire manifest. A murmur ran through the court, but Elena's face didn't change. She set the pod down on the polished floor and straightened. That was clumsy of them, she said mildly. I told them not to rush. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. You did this. She tilted her head. You think I'd arrive without a plan? One of the generals barked for the guards to seize her, but before they could take a step, the cryopod's seal hissed. Frost spilled onto the stone, and a low, vibrating growl filled the chamber. The honey badger stepped out, short, dense muscle wrapped in a coat that caught the light like steel shavings. Its eyes locked on the nearest movement. The guards hesitated, clearly unsure whether this squat creature warranted their weapons. They learned too late. The badger moved. No wasted flourish, no sound, just a blur, and then the tearing scream of armor plates parting. One guard fell, then another, before the court's composure broke. Elena didn't watch. She stepped toward the throne, each footfall steady against the chaos behind her. You made a mistake, she said, of thinking a mother's war is about justice. It's not. It's about finality. The Emperor rose to his full height, towering over her, but something in his stance shifted, a trace of calculation replacing his earlier contempt. You think you can reach them before my fleets? They're already gone, she said, cutting him off exactly as he had done to her. A flicker of static passed over the court's central holomap. Icons marking human settlements began to glow, not in surrender, but in defiance, each representing a coordinated uprising. Merchant vessels blockading hyperspace lanes. Cargo crews walking off their posts in unison. Armed transports appearing at the edges of imperial sectors like teeth closing around a throat. She didn't smile, but the absence of one was its own warning. You've mistaken our history. You think humans are dangerous because we fight. But fighting isn't the point. We plan. We wait. We decide when the door closes. The Emperor's advisors whispered urgently, some looking toward the exits. The honey badger crouched low, its muzzle wet, daring anyone to move closer. Elena's gaze didn't leave the throne. This is your one chance to walk away from a war you won't survive. Give me my children. Every hour you delay, something you own disappears forever. The Emperor's mandibles clicked in slow, measured beats. You are a single human. She nodded once. And yet here we are. From somewhere deep in the palace, the muffled echo of an explosion rolled through the floor. Not an attack, too precise for that. A demolition of a single, deliberate target. The Emperor's eyes shifted slightly toward one of his generals, who paled under his carapace. You're not here for just them, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. This is something larger. She gave him nothing. Behind her, the honey badger settled into stillness, its work done for the moment. The guards kept their distance, the floor around them slick with the evidence of hesitation's cost. "Consider this dinner," she said. "What comes next is the hunt." The court had gone silent again, but it was no longer the silence of amusement. It was the tight, shallow-breathed quiet of beings trying not to draw the gaze of the thing in the room that might decide to end them. Elena took one step closer to the throne. The space between them was now no longer ceremonial. It was the measured span between predator and prey. "You still have time to do the wise thing," she said. "Not much, but some." The emperor did not move, but his advisors began to edge backward. Somewhere in the far corner of the chamber, a door opened quietly, and a pair of small figures peered out, too brief to be sure, but enough for Elena's eyes to sharpen. She didn't look directly. She didn't break stride. But the air in the room shifted, charged now with something far more dangerous than the growl of the honey badger. The emperor's mandibles stopped clicking. His voice, when it came, was lower than before. "If you think you can take them." She cut him off with a glance, so sharp it made him stop speaking mid-breath. "I don't take," she said. "I reclaim." The alarms changed pitch, deeper now, signaling something that rattled even the seasoned guards. One of the generals checked his comlink and went still, all four eyes wide. The emperor's gaze locked on Elena. "What have you done?" She let the question hang a moment, then answered in the same calm tone she'd used to order tea days before. "I told you. Dinner first." And then, with the faintest nod toward the far corner where she'd seen the glimpse of her children, she added, "Now we begin." The first detonation was so precise it sounded like a single breath pulled from the bones of the palace. A tremor passed underfoot, barely enough to rattle the crystal banners above the court, but enough to make the emperor's advisors freeze mid-step. The sound wasn't random. It was surgical. Elena didn't flinch. She stood at the center of the hall, the honey badger pressed close to her knee, its fur slick and eyes locked forward. The faint heat of its body bled through her trousers, steady and grounding. Across the dais, the emperor's compound eyes flickered, his mandibles shifting in patterns that meant calculation, not rage. Somewhere deep in the city's spine, sirens began to layer over one another, station alarms, shield breaches, power fluctuations. The overlapping chorus wasn't chaos, it was rhythm. Each tone, each delay between them, was deliberate. Elena could hear it. She'd written this song years ago. "You've triggered an incident in my capital," the emperor said slowly, as if speaking to a dangerous child. "I've given it a signal," she corrected. "Your capital will keep breathing as long as I let it." The nearest general took a step toward her, hand on the hilt of his blade, but stopped when the honey badger turned its head just enough to show its teeth. The movement was small, almost lazy, but the general's boots scraped backward an inch. Hollow displays flickered to life along the walls, unbidden. They showed ports sealed by human freighters, planetary gates locked under emergency maintenance, orbital patrols boxed in by civilian cargo ships that refused to move. None of it was violent yet. All of it was fatal if it stayed that way. "This isn't an invasion," one advisor muttered to another. "It's a chokehold." Elena caught the whisper without turning her head. "You can breathe," she said softly, "until I decide you can't." The emperor straightened, towering, his armor catching the chamber's high light. "You'll destroy yourself with this. Humanity has no homeworld strong enough to." "We don't need a homeworld," she said, voice sharp as frost. "We carry war in our hands." The honey badger moved then, not to attack, but to pace, circling her once like a black ripple in shallow water. Its claws clicked against the polished floor, counting time. In the corner of her eye, movement, a door sliding open at the far edge of the throne room. Two small figures stepped out, guarded by a single officer whose posture screamed overconfidence. Her children's faces were pale but unbroken, their eyes locked on hers with a focus she taught them. No running, no shouting. Wait for the mark. Her heart tightened, but her voice stayed flat. "Bring them to me," she said. The emperor made a show of considering it, tapping one claw against the armrest of his throne. "Return them now, and this demonstration ends." She let the pause stretch, not to think, but to let every ear in the room feel the weight of it. "No," she said. Returning them is where it starts to end. How fast it ends depends on you. Another tremor rolled through the floor. This one was sharper. The kind that meant something above them had ceased to exist. An aide sprinted to the Emperor's side, whispered something too fast for translation. The Emperor's mandibles snapped shut, and for the first time since she'd entered, his gaze shifted to the high vaulted windows. "Orbital control is offline," the aide stammered. Elena didn't look away from him. "That's the thing about doors," she said. "They can be locked from either side." He tried a different angle. "If this is war, your species will be hunted to the edge of." "It's not war," she said, stepping closer until the steps to the dais were under her boots. "It's reclamation. You took 2 children from a mother. I'm taking an empire from a tyrant." Behind her, the honey badger stopped pacing. It crouched low, head forward, tail stiff. The nearest guards tightened their grips on their weapons, but none dared be the first to strike. The Emperor's mandibles flared wide, the alien equivalent of bare teeth. "Then we have nothing left to discuss." "On the contrary," she said, mounting the first step. "Now we're negotiating." Every step she took brought another flicker of panic across the room. Small shifts in stance, hands brushing for hidden weapons, eyes darting to exits that no longer opened. By the time she reached the base of the dais, she could feel the change in the air. The confidence had drained, leaving behind the dry, metallic tang of fear. The officer guarding her children tried to shift them backward, but the boy planted his feet. The girl lifted her chin. Elena didn't smile, but something in her gaze told them both to hold their ground. Her final step onto the dais was met with a ripple in the floor, a calm signal, subtle enough that only she and the Emperor's encrypted systems caught it. Her people were in position. The fleet outside had the palace bracketed. Every escape lane collapsed into a dead end. She leaned in slightly, close enough that her voice didn't need to carry. "Here's the offer. My children walk to me. Your fleet powers down. Your governors resign. You live to see another season. Refuse, and your name becomes a word we teach our young for the thing that once thought it ruled." The Emperor didn't move, but his eyes shifted fractionally to his left, toward the grand entry doors. They were closed, but beyond them the deep boom of heavy impacts echoed, doors tested, then abandoned as if the attackers had realized there was no point. "You think you can hold this forever," he said, but the certainty was gone. She straightened. "Forever's not the goal. Long enough is." Another aide rushed in, face drained of its usual oily calm. "Highness, the outer fleets are reporting mass desertions among their human crews. Supply lines are mine," Elena finished for him. The honey badger gave a low rumble, more vibration than sound, and stepped toward the children. The guard at their side stumbled backward without being touched. They crossed the few meters to her, silent, each taking one of her hands. Her grip was steady, as if this moment were just another step in a walk she'd always planned to take. With them beside her, she turned back to the Emperor. "The trap's closed," she said. "All that's left is the bite." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the Emperor sank back into his throne. His mandibles shifted once, twice, then stilled. It was not surrender in the human sense, but it was the closest his kind came to it. Elena inclined her head in a gesture almost polite. Wise choice. But as she stepped down from the dais, leading her children toward the far exit, her eyes flicked to the great banners above. Conquered worlds, their colors still defiant despite the years. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't over. Not with them. Not with the fleet. The chamber's great doors opened for her, without being touched. The honey badger padded ahead, leaving wet paw prints on the polished floor. Outside, the corridor was empty, the sounds of sirens and boots replaced by the hush of a city holding its breath. She didn't look back. Not yet. But the words she'd left unspoken in the chamber pressed hard against her teeth. Dinner's done. Now we hunt.